This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Fresh off of a NBA Finals in which we have seen the Golden State Warriors take their second title in 3 years. NBA, aka Team No Sleep, as so much is already happening in the association. I'm not wasting any time. I'm ready to roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand NBA aficionado, writer for one of the illest websites, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna, PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. I'm just saying, man, NBA boy love keeping a brother up at night.
It's absurd to have this much action and activity. This, I guess, early into the postseason, if you will, or I guess into the offseason.
Freeway early. Like, yes.
It's wild in these NBA streets, man, and it's great to be out here just to kind of take some of the hits that are going on out there. Twitter is ablaze. Everyone's writing a bunch of articles. My Twitter feed is looking like the Matrix right now. It's just nothing but code as people try to get off their hot takes into what's happening. But we're gonna jump right in, man. We have a great and amazing guest who's been in the league and can tell us a little bit of insight about what's happened. When it comes to being a scout and in the draft room for some teams and some other great rumors and stuff to get into towards the end of the show, man. So let's jump right in.
Most definitely, Shaw. So in a little bit, we are gonna have our man Pete Philo. He is an NBA executive. He has been a scout. He has done so many extraordinary things for the TPG Sports Group. They have a pro scout school. He'll be on board to talk a little bit about that and also get our mind right about what these pro scouts executives are thinking and considering, GMs are considering when it comes to draft preparation. What can we expect for this upcoming NBA draft? So he is a great, knowledgeable person. We're so excited to have him on board, and he'll be ready to help us break this down. Also, we're going to be talking about some of the crazy news in our segment of The Drop with the Paul George situation, with the Boston Celtics and the Philadelphia 76ers swapping picks, and then also breaking news happening right as we speak and recording this show on the Twitter side. We'll get into the digs of that. Adrian Wojnarowski, Mark Stein of ESPN with a breaking report with regards to the Cavaliers situation in their organization. So we've got so much to discuss. Once again, get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GayFaceLee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher Radio, Microsoft TuneIn, Player FM, iHeartRadio, Google Music, and the Roku channel. Download any of those platforms and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things in the association. You know how we do. You know how we roll, especially when it's in the off season. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it down.
Time now for the breakdown. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week we have a very special guest on board with us. And I couldn't, listen, I'm going to applaud Shaw for this one because we really couldn't think of a better way to kick off, the NBA offseason. While NBA draft is right upon us, the next thing that you have to look forward to is what is going to be the outlook, the outcome, the development of some of these gifted athletes. And not even just the guys that are in the draft, just even guys that are currently playing in the NBA. And one of the best ways for us to kind of really dig into it, looking at it from behind the scenes, is having someone who has the expertise and the acumen to help kind of visualize this and see it for the way it needs to be seen, because this is how we get excited about watching these NBA athletes on the basketball court and future NBA stars on the basketball court on a night in, night out basis. So with us this week, he is an NBA veteran. He is widely respected, not just by other scouts, but also by NBA executives like Kevin Pritchard. He is a 14-year NBA executive. He currently is hosting one of the premier events that will be taking place out in Las Vegas during the Summer League program. The name of the event is called the Pro Scout School. It has been kicked off with much fervor and much success. Our man, Pete Philo. Pete, thank you for joining us here this week here on the Baseline NBA podcast.
Guys, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. Appreciate it.
Pete, before we get into the digs of the school, the success of the Pro Scout School. The first thing that I want to get from you is, how did this happen for you? You go from someone who is toured the world, the globe. You are pretty much the architect for the pre-draft for international players to have a platform to put themselves on the world stage to be NBA prospects. And now you have elevated this to another level in developing a Pro Scout School. And not only is this considered as a networking event, it is also one of the key tools now that is being talked about and featured during the NBA Summer League, which is, to me, unprecedented. How did you elevate that from what you are currently doing and say, hey, I'm ready to take this to the next level?
Well, I appreciate you saying that. It's been a journey. I've been very fortunate, to be quite frank, and been to 75 countries and been around a lot of good people, and have a lot of good mentors, and starting with Donnie Nelson from the Mavs and Kevin Pritchard and Kevin McHale. I've had some really good people that I've learned from, and I have this entrepreneurial spirit, and so I'm always looking to connect people and help people and build things. And so as any great entrepreneur, you have to solve a problem, identify a problem first, and back into a solution. And so for me and my group at TPG Sports Group, we had this idea after I get asked two questions, honestly. In my entire time scouting, I'd get asked two most common questions were, one, what are you doing? What are you looking at, when you scout? What exactly are you scouting? And then two, how the heck did you get in this position? How did you become a scout? And so I started to realize that maybe there's a need. Maybe there's a need out there for a platform for people to, have an opportunity or create an opportunity for themselves. And so, the league is about relationships. And if you go through the entire league, you'll see 90-something% of scouts and executives have gotten there because of a relationship. And so I thought, well, one, you got to learn how to evaluate and all the things that happen when you evaluate. And then two, you got to start building some relationships. So I wanted to start a platform that gave that opportunity to people.
That is so poignant. I was lucky enough some time ago to intern with the Knicks, and the scouts, one of the lead scouts there at the time was Kenny Williamson, who actually had, he's passed away, unfortunately. He ended up transitioning.
Eggman, he's a legend.
Eggman, yes. And the exact same thing you just said is something he told me back then. He said, this is a relationship business, 100%. So when in the formation of your school, how do you teach people about that and the best ways to properly network within this business?
Sure. You're not gonna connect with everybody. What I mean by that is not everyone's going to like you, and you're not going to like everyone. But you have to, make yourself vulnerable. You got to put yourself out there a little bit. You have to ask questions. You have to be a good listener also somehow. You have to be willing to learn. You have to figure out how to engage with people. And that's not easy sometimes, coming out of your comfort zone, to maybe just put yourself out there and ask a question and say something like, hey, I'd love to meet with you later for 5 minutes just to pick your brain on something, or maybe I have some work I can show you, some reports, or, I'm doing things a little differently, creatively, and I want to show you something that I've come up with. You gotta offer some type of value, and the real value right now in the NBA and scouting is information. There's information and there's good information, and for those that are trying to get in, the hardest thing for a general manager right now is to figure out all the background intel on players. The GMs can identify their talent. Not everyone's right. Sometimes they make mistakes, but typically the veteran GMs can identify talent pretty quickly. But the hardest thing for them, like I said, is being able to capture this really good information and background stuff on the player. What makes them tick? What's inside this guy? Who's around him? What type of people? What type of foundation does he have? How are his family members? All these things that before you invest in a player, let's say with a draft pick or moving up, moving down in the draft, you want to know what they are and who they are, and so that's important.
Pete Philo joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, as he will be hosting the premier event along with the Vegas Summer League. It is called the Pro Scout School, which will take place July 10th, July the 11th. Pete, you have a extraordinary list of participants who are going to be coming out to speak at the event. And I noticed that you have as your event MC, you got your man, Fran Fraschilla. First of all, talk to me about your experience with Fran. Lord knows, Sean and myself, man, we have been dying to get Fran on our show to be able to talk about some of these prospects, to talk, NBA draft and everything like that. But your personal experience with Fran, and how does that cultivate to what, I know that you're expecting to be an extraordinary event, but having someone like him hosting this event with the lineup of people that you have speaking in each panel, it has to be extraordinary.
Well, it is. And let me tell you something. I'm really fortunate to have Fran as the MC. There's nobody better to have as an MC. The guy is a junkie of basketball and knows has coached the game, really cares about the game, and can speak on every level of the game. And so he's perfect. He's a curious guy too. He never stops learning, and he humbles himself. And it's amazing how good he is. And, of course, he's a broadcaster now, so it's easy for him to facilitate these panels and breakout rooms. And my relationship goes back a long ways with Fran. I played for him at Manhattan College in New York. And from there, when I started the Euro camp in Treviso, I think it was year 2, I was able to bring him on board. I hired him to be one of our coaches. And from there, we've just been best of friends, and really, really fortunate to have him in my life. So really lucky, the guy's great at what he does, and I'll do my best to try to get him on this podcast. He needs to be.
Well, we definitely appreciate that, Pete. So a couple more questions before we actually transition to some of the draft talk for this upcoming season. Sure. What are some of the main benefits? You talked about the networking, and you'll teach people how to do that. But with this school taking place in Vegas, just give people a little bit more information about that. Some of the main benefits to get, who else will be there, and let them know the price and what it will take to get out there to the Pro Scout School.
Sure. So Pro Scout School is July 10th and 11th. It's at the Hard Rock Hotel. Day one is typically made up of panels, and we have 3 panels on day one. One is Basketball 360, where we have 3 NBA executives on that panel. Panel 2 is a player development panel, where we have Adam Felipe from the Hornets, who's one of the best shooting coaches in the world. We have Drew Hanlon from Pure Sweat, who is the maestro right now of developing players, and he's fantastic. And then I don't have my board in front of me. The third on the player development panel, Bob McKinnon, head coach of the Texas Legends in the D-League. And then we have our coaches panel, where they're going to talk about execution and adjustments and development. And that's going to be the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, Fred Hoiberg, Steve Silas, assistant coach of the Charlotte Hornets, and John Welch, assistant coach for the Clippers. And, from there, day 2, we segue into more intimate breakout rooms, where we pretty much cut the room in a third and to have a little bit more intimate interaction. And we'll have rotating rooms, an hour apiece. And it's where it gets really interesting, because we dive a little bit deeper into the topics. One room is going to be myself and Tony Ronzoni from the Dallas Mavericks. We're going to talk about talent evaluation and the characteristics that translate by position, and the rules difference in college and pros, and why certain things translate and why certain things don't translate. Why a guy like, I don't know, for example, Adam Morrison maybe didn't make it as far as he wanted to, and he was a 28 point per game guy in college. Just for an example, and he's a heck of a player. But there are certain things that happen, and we're going to cover that as deep as we can. Bobby Marks, who is the guru right now of salary cap and CBA stuff, and that is a huge component of the NBA makeup. And you're going to see a lot of that. You're probably hearing a lot of that talk right now. If you follow him on Twitter, Bobby's great at what he does in terms of explaining deals and why they are able to get done and why they can't be done. Everybody, when they talk trade, most fans want to talk about talent for talent. That's not really how it goes down. There's a major component of salary cap and CBA rules that have to be in place in order for a deal to get done. And then our third is going to be a player development where Pure Sweat is going to take over that room. Rich Kozlowski the CEO of Pure Sweat, and then Drew Hanlon and Alan Stein will be in that room and talk about all player development stuff. So it's a lot of fun. There's going to be, content, information overload, and a lot of learning and a lot of connecting with people.
Just by your estimation last year, Pete, how many approximately attended the event? And the other thing that I was really curious about, what you were just mentioning, before, where not everything is always looked at from a talent to talent, comparison, or as far as a narrative go. And as to Shaw's point, I know that we were going to kind of talk about, a couple of things that have just taken place now recently that could affect this upcoming draft. When the group of these guys collectively get together, how much of it is sharing information that is bettering the competitive balance of the league, of the NBA, and how much of it is really kind of taking a snapshot at the state of the league in itself, that helps you, for example, prepare the players that you talk to, the personnel that you are talking to at this event, to really put them in the best position possible to maximize whatever talent that they're bringing to the table for either their organization, for possible teams that they may be playing for, and things of that nature.
Sure, no question. We cap the event every year at 175 people. We don't go over that, and we could. We sold out for 3 years in a row. We're, I think, 8 or 10 people away from another sellout. This will be sold out for 4 years in a row, and we don't want to go over that number. We don't think it's right. We want people to benefit from as much intimacy as you can with a room like that. We don't want to be a 300, 400, 500 person event. And two, to answer your question about strategy and information and that sort of thing, it's a lot of sharing, and there's a lot of stealing, and there's a lot of dialogue. I've learned. I was in the NBA 14 years, and I learned every year, and I continue to learn. I also share things that people steal from me or want to talk to me about, and how I did things when I evaluated or when we were putting teams together and things like that. So guys are pretty open, but you're not going to share all the secret sauce down to the very, let's say it's a team philosophy, but a personal philosophy or, how things are done. That's the foundation of it, and from there you got to use your imagination a little bit and try to figure it out. But from there, at least you have a better understanding of how it works, and you can speak the language a little bit easier at that point. I tell people all the time, you want to get in the league, learn the CBA immediately. There's only a handful of guys around the world that know it. And when you can speak it, you become a little bit more valuable. Oh, and you combine that with the ability to get information and evaluate talent and all these things. We have a GM experience and a draft room experience that we add to Scout School. And I don't need to get into all that right now, but I want to give an example of when I interview the people that are that apply for the GM experience and the draft room experience. I always ask them these 3 questions. How many NBA agents do you have on your phone? How many Division I head coaches, assistant coaches, video coordinators, managers do you have on your phone? And how many NBA executives do you have on your phone? And typically, the answer is 0, 0, 0. It may be 1 or 2 coaches, maybe 1 agent. Well, where are you going to get this good information from if you don't have those relationships?
Right.
So, one thing is coming to Scout School to learn and connect with NBA executives, but you also have to be of value to an NBA executive. And to be of value to an NBA executive is not just because you're passionate about basketball and because you know basketball. That's not going to get you hired.
Well,
you have to know people.
One thing I wanted to add on top of that point, Pete, is the fact that if you have these type of individuals like Adam Filippi, John Welch, Mike Bourne, these guys coming out there to events like these, and say someone like even myself who has a sincere interest about cultivating and networking, and it's not just from a media perspective, just a basketball knowledge perspective, the fact that they actually have made their presence felt there, I think says something more about their philosophy and their mantra about how they absorb information and disseminate that, and try to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak, rather than always trying to be, trailing behind. And that to me says it speaks volumes, because that type of accessibility is very rare to find. But when they put themselves out there, you have to, take advantage of those opportunities where they present themselves.
No question. Just an example, Adam Felipe and Drew Hanlon and Bob McKinnon will be on the player development panel. Well, my guess is that, Fred Hoiberg and Steve Silas are going to be sitting there somewhere listening as well. And as Drew says something about how he, uses certain NBA, rotations in his footwork material. Well, Adam may say something, well, man, that may help me with my shooting. Or Fred may say, well, that may help me with my assistant coaches implementing something player development in the off season. And so it's really, really important. And these guys will all take something if it's valuable to them.
Well, I think you're presenting a strong case here, for the value of this program, and you've hit some key names and buzz names that we've even worked with Adam Felipe. We've had Bobby Marks on our podcast as well, so it feels like we're all in the same family here right now, Phil. And
we're kind of like distant cousins to you, Pete. That's okay. Yeah. Don't worry about that.
But all good.
But one of the things you touched on a little bit earlier, and hey, your guy Kevin Pritchard, he's in a very precarious situation himself right now with news that Paul George and people like that want to get moved. Have you ever been in a situation similar to that, or even just tell us a little bit about what it's like to be in the draft room, if you will, working for a team as you prepare for a draft, and maybe even a potential big trade of one of their players when the draft night is coming to peace?
Sure. Well, first thing I'll say, there's nobody more prepared to pull something off than Kevin Pritchard. I've been in the league a long time. And there's a lot of great executives. Kevin Pritchard he's gifted because the guy can speak on many levels. He could actually coach the game, which he did briefly. And he's such a creative thinker. He's really, really smart. He's really liked by agents. He can communicate and with these agents in the appropriate way. And he knows play. He's a former player. He's got all the angles. And so I don't know exactly what's going on, in terms of, because, there's a lot of speculation, and if anyone's talked to Paul or Aaron Mintz's agent specifically, then they'll get their answer. But so I'll stay quiet on that part. But I will say that the way it works typically is, guys will have to go through this process, and no one really knows what they're doing yet. Yeah, Danny pulled the trigger yesterday and today, finalizing that deal with 1 and 3. But people said to me, somebody called me today and said, why didn't he wait and try to get more later on as you get closer to the draft? You'll get more as you get closer. Well, when you're evaluating a trade and a future first has to be in the deal, there's only a handful of teams you want to get that future first from anyway, because you want the higher pick to be. You don't want a late first round pick to go in a deal when you're flopping necessarily. You could, but it's more valuable if you get a higher pick. And so I think he felt comfortable. And then I listened to his presser today, and he mentioned, he felt that 1 was the same as 3. Why not? If he feels that way, then why not go back 2 spots and pick up a future first? If it works out the way he wants it to work out, then great for him. Now all these picks, he's going to have to turn them into players at some point. That's just the name of the game. But the process is interesting, guys, because right now all your work is done in terms of evaluating talent. Your boards are ranked. You got your 1 through 60 ranked. You have your you have your free agents ranked. You have your summer league roster starting to shape up. You have you guys ranked by position. And then ranked by talent, and then you start putting potentials on the board. The phones are ringing. You start getting these deals, and you start ranking the deals. And then you start preparing for the unexpected, and that's the hardest thing to do, because if you're sitting at 9, and there's a couple teams with multiple picks behind you, you got to prepare in case they call you. If you don't want to move back, you're not calling them. and entertaining. But you're definitely canvassing the league and trying to figure out if there's interest on your roster. Guys get through this really quick, believe it or not, because if you just have bad contracts, non-tradable assets on your roster, there's not going to be a lot of dialogue. I've been in that position before, and then I've been in the position where we had a lot of tradable assets, where we had a lot of good contracts, and people call us all the time. And so just preparing for that scenario, those scenarios, and hoping to make some good decisions on draft night.
Pete Philo joining us here on the Baseline NBA podcast, 14-year executive of the TBG Sports Group, and he is also the brainchild, the spearheader for the Pro Scout School that will be taking place during NBA Summer League in Vegas, and also for Sports Tank, which is the sports version of Shark Tank. So definitely two entities that us sports fanatics are truly going to be excited for. So Pete, on the subject with what has now just transpired with regards to Paul George saying, hey, this is it for me. I want to be a free agent come the end of this upcoming NBA season. Knowing Pritchard and the relationship that you have with him, how aggressive do you think that he moves with having this information now? Do you find him to be the type of person to let scenarios play out and he waits until there is the absolute best situation scenario? Or do you see him like Kenny Rogers, and being the gambler that he is not afraid to pull the trigger on what he and changing the narrative? Because especially out in a small market like Indiana, where there's been some years of success, but it's always been up and down since the post Reggie Miller era. It's interesting how hesitant things have been for the Indiana Pacers outside of the Danny Granger, outside of, the Al Harringtons. Here with Paul George, this was a scenario where, he could have been a Pacer, right? But clearly the writing's on the wall. Larry Bird brings the right guy in, but him being the right guy, is he the right guy for that Indiana area? Because everything there is kind of very moderate, conservative. You know what I'm saying? Don't rock the boat. But maybe that's exactly what the Pacers need, and maybe Pritchard's the kind of guy who will do that.
Well said. Very interestingly said. Kevin, like I said before, no one's better prepared for this scenario than Kevin. Just super smart guy. And what do I think he'll do? I think he's going to prepare. The guy's on the phone 24/7, and knowing him personally, he sleeps 4.5 hours a night. Guy's up every morning at like 5. Seriously, he doesn't sleep. And so with Kevin, KP probably has canvassed the league. He knows he's got his information. He's got some stuff on the board, is my guess. And he's probably talking to agents daily, executives daily, GMs daily, and just trying to figure out. Now, the one issue obviously is that if it is true that Paul wants to be in LA, then you'd think that LA has a little bit of leverage, but that's not really the case. It's really not, because what happens is all it takes is one team. All it takes is one other team to get this thing on the 5-yard line, and then LA is going to have to come to the table. And so I think Kevin's going to do the right thing, and he knows what the values are and what it's worth. And he also knows, he has options. He doesn't have to trade him on trade deadline. On draft night. He's got him under contract for next year. He can trade him at the trade deadline. So he's going to do what's right. And then the other thing about, this type of scenario, going through it, and it's very publicized right now in the media and everything, he's going to know who has interest. And I'll give you a scenario. He's going through this process, doesn't like anything. 3 or 4 teams are really, really hot after Paul and hot after a deal, but they can't get one done. They just can't get the numbers to work. Because, quite frankly, some of the deals that are out there you see on the, you're hearing about right now, I don't know if they're true or not, they're going to probably need a third team to facilitate.
Right.
Because you just can't. I mean, you just can't make it work with some teams. But if he doesn't pull the trigger and then he gets through the season and you got trade deadline, he's going to know who those teams were. And the funny thing about the trade deadline is that teams typically in the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spot are all nervous. They're nervous about the playoff picture. And then you see teams give up a little bit more than they normally would because whether they're trying to keep their job, they have to be in the playoffs for whatever reason, or they got off to a slow start because maybe an injury, maybe chemistry, something happened, and they got to get back up. And all it takes is one Paul George, and they're back in the mix. And so, and Kevin's got a pulse on all that. You know, I have no doubt at all that Kevin Pritchard's going to do the right thing.
Well, thank you for sharing that, that extensive conversation regarding KP, as you call him, and then the Pacers and Paul George. And I guess the next question is, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, is you talked about Danny Ainge and the Celtics, right? And understanding kind of what his mindset might have been in that. But give us your put on your scout hat back on right now and let me know, who do you think is the best talent available in this draft? And quite frankly, did Danny Ainge make a mistake?
Well, if it was any other year, because I'm not traveling this year, so I haven't seen all these guys live. I've seen a couple. So I'm not going to put myself out there, but I will tell you there's 7 or 8 guys that are really good, and I don't think there is one clear guy. The way the draft is evaluated is in buckets, and it's the all-star bucket, starter, rotation, and fringe. If you think there are 4 all-stars in this draft, well, there you go. There's 4 all-stars in this draft. You can't go wrong, essentially. If you think there's 6, trade back. You can trade back, and it's okay. I don't think Danny did the wrong thing, but I don't know if Danny's done either. I mean, who's to say he's finished with all the assets he has? I mean, he could turn 3 into 5 and another future. He could turn 3 and a player on his roster and a bad contract into Paul or another player, for example, and a future first, 2 future firsts. The guy's got 7 future firsts coming up in the next couple of years. So he's got a lot of ammunition to work with a team that obviously has some pretty good players and made a good run. Sometimes, guys, you're at the mercy of a window. Is their window Isaiah Thomas? When I was with Indiana, our window early on was David West. And then it turned into, now our window's Paul George. As long as we have Paul playing at this highest level, our window's him. Let's get some players around him and try to make this happen. Of course, we went to the Eastern Conference Finals, and things were great, but we ran into that number 23 guy out there in Cleveland, which wasn't very easy. He was in Miami at the time, but it wasn't really easy for anybody, clearly. But Danny in Boston, to answer you directly, and to give you my feel on players, I think there's several all-stars in this class, and I think there's a lot of starters. I usually evaluate the draft on depth of starters, and I think it goes pretty deep with starters. That doesn't mean starters in year 1. That means typically after year 3, in the first 3 years, that guy's turning into a starter by year 3. And I don't get into all this draft grade stuff. Don't you guys get into it either. You guys will make yourself look bad. Don't do draft grades.
Man, I'm tired. I got tired of my grading, man. To tell you the truth, I like the point system. I like the bell curve. I'll play the bell curve more. Pete, I'm real curious about something because we're looking at Shaw brought up the question looking at this from the Danny Ainge perspective because he has the number 1 pick. I'm going to look at it from the Philadelphia 76ers perspective because all of the talk is about the fact that the Sixers believe that Markelle Fultz is going to be their point guard of the future. And I think it lends more so to my thought process because I'm glad you brought up the fact that most scouts and people who are evaluating the talent, they have these buckets of how they're looking at these players. I'm surprised that the one that doesn't come out as a bucket that's being, brought up is, franchise starter or franchise builder. You mentioned all-stars as the one that from what I can hear is like the top one. So when you're looking at a situation like the Philadelphia 76ers, and you've already hit gold, I guess you could say, with guys like Joel Embiid, bearing he stays healthy, Ben Simmons, bearing he stays healthy, you found a gem in Robert Covington. Are we really talking about that saying, hey, that missing piece is a Markelle Fultz? If you're the Philadelphia 76ers, is this a high risk, high reward type of move just simply because of the fact that this team still has yet to prove anything yet on a bigger scale. It's just that the window you're talking about could easily put the Philadelphia 76ers in a conversation of being a lower bottom seed in the Eastern Conference. But nothing has shown that these guys have yet to win anything. And you can make the correlation, say, to the Minnesota Timberwolves. And they've got talent on the other side of the conference with those guys as well, too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know, first thing, they're not even close. Okay, Philly's got a ways to go. Brian Colangelo's going to do a great job. Brian and Jerry are lifers and great basketball men and minds and tireless workers. They're going to be fine, you know, but they're not even close. And so, no, Markelle Fultz isn't the answer right now. But what happens is you draft as much talent as you acquire as much talent and draft as much talent as you possibly can, and you figure it out. Okay. So you draft Markelle Fultz. You know, the thing about Philly, they have a lot of young players, like young pieces, tradable assets. They get calls, trust me, because of the young, talented players they have. They could get another first-round pick pretty quickly if this little experiment doesn't necessarily work in the next 3 years.
The Colangelo experiment, yes. that's okay. That's what people out there are trying to call this now. So.
but you know, it's if clearly Brian has fell in love with one player up there, and we still don't know if it's Markelle Fultz. I guess it is from everything you read, but if it is, and then maybe he sees him as an all-star, and that's okay. With these other young assets, he can go get another first-round pick in the next year or the year after, and I believe there's protection on the future first that he traded as well, so he has a little bit of protection on the pick and things of that nature, but. It is a little bit of a risk. You know, I would think from a lot of guys that I've talked to, as well as myself, that there's a lot of parity up top. You know, there's five guys. There's 6 guys to me that are all pretty darn good. Now, the process is really when you get them inside your building. You saw it started to shake down a little bit when guys were going in for workouts, and it's not just the workout. You know their skill sets. And all that, you're really putting them some positions that maybe you want to see if they're really uncomfortable at, and how bad is it really, and how much work will you have to do it to get it to where you need it to get. And then secondly, who are they as people? When you can sit in front of a guy and ask him strategic questions and get answers from him, you understand this person a whole heck of a lot better than you did. You just evaluating them on tape and watching them play basketball, you know, in the arena. So. Things start to change at that point. The hardest thing to evaluate is what's inside of a guy. You know, what is he really like personally? Because you're investing in a guy, you know, and you want to make sure this guy's invested in his craft and his profession and what is he going to bring. And so that's a big part of it moving forward.
All right, Pete, I'm going to put you on the spot here, man. You know, we've all exchanged some pleasantries, and it's been a pretty nice podcast, but I'm going to call you out here, man.
Buckle up, Pete. When Shaw gets into this mode, man, I have no idea where this is going, so just preparing you.
Right.
I mean, we have a gentleman of his magnitude on our show, someone who's been around the league, like legitimately in the league.
He's softening you up. Here we go.
You know, sitting with the GMs and things of that nature, and you've talked a lot about, you know, dealing with players, their personality, dealing with their skill set, even understanding the culture around them, all right? So I want you to give me 2 examples here. One, a player that you are just flat out wrong about in terms of, you know, either way, you know what I mean? And one that, you know, you nailed it right on the head in terms of, you know, what type of player that person was going to be. So listen, you know what I mean? Don't have to be shy. You're not trying to protect anybody. Just go ahead and give us the real here, Pete.
Does it have to be someone that I actually drafted or did not draft in terms of right or wrong?
Oh, you got some qualifiers here. All right. Just your overall opinion, because I think from as a scout, you're looking at the league on holistically. So whether you had an opportunity to get that person or not, just kind of some people
sure.
like that example.
All right, guy I was wrong on, and you could argue it a little bit, and I have a little caveat to it, but
there's a disclaimer to this one.
On, okay. Yeah, but I'll explain, and I hope you could appreciate it. But the guy I was wrong on, Jameer Nelson. Back in the day, I was with the Mavs. And it was just when the rule changed of hand checking from the free throw line above. And now you see everything that's in play with when you can't hand check. The league was way ahead of everybody hoping that it would turn out to this type of basketball. Because you can't, hand check means what? You get in the lane, which means what? Which means open shots everywhere, which means put shooters everywhere on the floor. Now you're seeing that brand of basketball, which means highest ratings of all time, right? So, which means money. So I didn't catch it. I didn't get it when they first made the rule change. Little guards didn't make it back then. You had to be special. You had to be special. The old school Isaiah Thomas special. And so, it took a while for all of us as executives to understand, and it's still the hardest position to evaluate in the NBA is the point guard spot coming out of college. It's just the hardest to evaluate for many reasons. And then guys, a guy got right, or a few. I'll throw it out there while I can. Kevin Love, we got crushed for making that pick over OJ. Made the OJ Mayo trade, and we had it positioned the entire time. Memphis really wanted OJ, and we played the game like we loved OJ, but we really had our target on Kevin Love, and it turned out to be pretty good. We got off some bad contracts, so it wasn't just player for player. We really did a good job with drafting Kevin Love, and Kevin McHale did a really good job with that. Marc Gasol. I loved Marc Gasol. He was in Girona, Spain, actually playing in the ACB, and you watch Marc, and it's easy not to fall in love with him because the speed factor and that sort of thing. But Marc's small area quickness was really good. He's got unbelievably quick hands, and his instinctively he just reads the game, and he's tough, and he can score, and he can rebound, he can pass, he can really pass. And so I did everything I could to try to get him, but we couldn't make it happen. Serge Ibaka, I absolutely loved. Nick Batum, I loved. Klay Thompson. I had Klay Thompson in the top 5 that year, and couldn't make it happen. But sometimes you're at the mercy of your consensus staff. And that being said, I've been around some really good people and really fortunate to be in the league that long. So.
Well, my final one here for you before we let you get up out of here, Pete, is just from as you had some experience with international leagues, for our own just kind of knowledge, if you will, and obviously our listeners and fans as well too, what really is the best league out there outside of the NBA? What's the best international league where you think that has the best depth of talent that can cross over to the NBA?
Okay, so the international leagues are broken down. One is the Euro League, which is basically the top couple teams in every league. It's made up of that, and it's one league called the Euro League. And then below that is the Euro Cup, which is also probably third, fourth, type of ranking in each league, and they have their own tournament as well. And then from there, the Spanish League is great, the ACB, the Turkish League. It shifts every 5 or 6 years where the money goes, where the resources go. Then you all of a sudden see the, teams start to get a little bit better. And right now there's a lot of stuff going on in Turkey, a lot of good players, a lot of good teams. Spanish League always stays good. Barcelona, Madrid, that sort of thing. In fact, I have one of the best coaches in my house right now, Fotis Katsikaris from Greece. We're getting ready to have a barbecue at my house. He came over to visit, and we're going to have former head coach of the Greek national team, and does a really good job in the Spanish League.
That's what's up. I could go for some barbecue myself. Right? What about you, CO?
Yeah, I like skirt steak. Okay, thank you.
Right,
I like skirt.
Right.
Oh man,
Pete, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just saying. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us, man. I can't wait to go out to Vegas and have a chance to interact with you myself. And check out the school and check out some of the connections and do some networking, as you alluded to, and maybe make some text and bring some of these guys on our show. Again, I think this was an amazing segment for our fans who are really going to enjoy kind of the behind the scenes of what it's like to be in the front office, evaluating talent, and understanding what it is to be in the draft.
Well, great. I look forward to seeing you out there, and I look forward to meeting you. And thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun. You guys are a fun group.
We appreciate it. It is the incomparable, just an awesome individual, Pete Philo. Be sure to check out the 2017 Pro Scout School out in Las Vegas. If you need more information, have interest in going out there and being a part of the school, go to tpgsportsgroup.com. All of the information will be made available to you there. July the 10th, July the 11th. Pete, we appreciate you so much for hopping on board with us here this week on the Baseline NBA podcast, and we definitely look forward to bringing you back on again real soon, brother.
Thanks, guys. Anytime. Take care.
All right, you're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and this was the breakdown. Time now for the drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast, and before we even get into the drop, Shaw, kudos to you, my man, for you having the savoir-faire, basically, and the flair, the networking savvy, as I will put it, to be able to bring an esteemed person like Pete Philo on our show, man. It's really great when you have someone who's been in the NBA for as long as he has accomplished so many great things. And rather than just kind of, sitting back on all of his accolades, he is still proactively being out there, providing platforms that not only give more insight to those that are passionate about being in the NBA, to those that want to just know more about the NBA, not just the respective fan, but also even executives and people who are currently in the mix, building up the brand and the competitive balance that we see in night out, man. It's just absolutely amazing to have a person like Pete Philo on our show.
Yeah, it's great. It really is. We've been very lucky and very blessed to have some real people that have been tied into the league. As we mentioned, Adam Felipe joined our show last summer. We've had Bobby Marks on. We've had Higginson on our show. And to have a guy like Pete come on now as well too. And I can assure you, Vegas is an amazing time, as he said, to network and to kind of connect with league executive players. Everyone's just so accessible when they're around. And for the most part, they're in a good mood. They're out there, they're chilling, watching hoops. Kind of, it's a hot outside, whatever like that. So they go to the pool, they grab some drinks, and they're just in a more relaxed mood than they are during the regular season. So I am definitely a proponent of Las Vegas and being out there. And I think his Pro Scout School is going to continue to sell and do a great job. I went to a school out there myself some years ago as well too, kind of in the similar mode to learning about being a basketball general manager and just some of the intricacies of that. So Pete does a great job with what he did, especially talking to us a little bit about what it's like to be in the draft room on draft night.
Well, speaking about the Pro Scout School, all I know is that right now, David Griffin, who is now considered the former general manager of the Cleveland Cavaliers, might have some time on his hands. So, Pete, if you're listening to our show, you might want to give him a shout. It looks like he's got some free time booked to head out to Las Vegas and offer his expertise. Because according to Adrian Wojnarowski, what do we call him? The vertical god of and knowing all of everything that happens in the association, there have been reports that David Griffin is out as the general manager for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Just as we're about to get into the other news with regards to the Danny Ainge and Philadelphia 76ers trade, and then we're talking about Paul George, this is another blockbuster move, Shaw, hot, fresh off the Twitter feed as we're recording this show. I really don't know what to make of it. I don't know whether or not I'm completely surprised by this, but it does give you reason to start questioning the tenor of the situation that is happening out there in Cleveland.
To some degree, I'll say this. I think Dan Gilbert is trying to save some money, and he's going El Cheapo route here.
Why did you just switch to Geico? You don't lose the GM who helped you get a championship for the organization and has facilitated the basketball team to 3 straight NBA finals. Yes, I know LeBron James is the reason for that, but damn it, David Griffin is the person who put the personnel that LeBron James wanted around him to even have this opportunity.
Right, but it's expensive to do so, and you're paying that luxury tax and that repeater tax. You might be saying, "Listen here, Griff. You've done a great job, and you're going to command a hefty salary." But I think the writing has been on the wall for this for a little while because everyone's saying, "Well, listen, why haven't they resigned and why haven't they come to negotiation at this point? And to some degree, it even might be a Griffin decision too. I mean, the statement says that they mutually agreed to part ways. I don't know if it was a matter of just a money thing. I think Gilbert was like, listen, he may not want to pay him that much, but Griffin May is like, listen, if I'm going to say I need X amount of dollars, otherwise he's really not that interested. It's hard to be general manager of that team, especially when people think LeBron is really puppeting the strings, if you a little bit. So Griffin may be trying to go out there and try to earn his stripes in a different team and in a different way.
Shaw, can I put on my conspiracy theory hat for a moment?
It's been a minute.
So it's been a minute, right? Okay, so here I'm gonna. If people who do not follow Adrian Wojnarowski, you must be smoking something, okay? But I want you to go to the Twitter, and I want you to see how Adrian Wojnarowski lays out the outline of this. Now, the other part of this caveat that we did not discuss with reference to David Griffin departing the Cleveland Cavaliers is that there are now rumors or sources say that Chauncey Billups, right? Bookham, right? Big shot, right? Mr. Big Shot. He is in possible conversations in the running for president of basketball operations. Shaw, I don't know if there's ever a position that has more omens on the good or the bad of a franchise more than whenever we start talking about someone being the president of basketball operations. Okay. And I'm just saying, what if David Griffin in his heart of hearts says, maybe if I'm going to be paid the money that I'm owed and you're not going to do it and you're not going to give it to me as a GM, why don't you make me president of basketball operations? What if maybe David Griffin's aspirations is to be that guy and Dan Gilbert doesn't want to do that? He doesn't either want to pony up the money to do that or he doesn't want to acquiesce the idea of giving David Griffin a position of that entitlement. And so now the cheaper way to go is getting our man Chauncey Billups to run the show, whom by also will be conferring with Tyronn Lue and with Dan Gilbert about who the next GM might be. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's possible. You know, I can't remember DeGriff's time back in Phoenix. If he had, the president role, in addition to the general manager role as well too. I can't remember. Maybe he was the president. I think Kerr was the general manager actually back then. So, and again, once you get that taste, maybe you want some of it back, especially when you've built a team that's gone to 3 straight NBA finals as they have. And yeah, it wasn't a competitive finals. We all know that. But listen, the Eastern Conference seems to be unlocked at least for a year or two more, as long as LeBron is willing to stay there. But with this happening, one caveat that Woj tweeted out there, and also we want to make sure we get props from Mark Stein of ESPN, because I think he was first on this with this report. But with all the trade conversations, and we've already talked a little bit about it in our show regarding Paul George, teams are like, all right, well, the Cavs wanted to get in the Paul George conversation. They wanted to get in the Jimmy Butler conversation. They don't know who the hell to negotiate with. Because, Griffin's leaving June 30th, so is he going to be there? Is this who we talk to? Is this deal we can make
this really
now or
is,
not?
Yeah, this is really a bad time because now with, and we'll get right into that, Shaw, but also with the speculations about the Cleveland Cavaliers trying to make a play to bring Jimmy Butler on, now the same 2 players that were being heavily touted at the trade deadline this past season, again, are coming up in multiple conversations before we even get to draft night. And if you're Danny Ainge and the Boston Celtics, you obviously see a chink in the armor, right? So the kettle is hot right now. It's steaming. How aggressive should you be as Danny Ainge to really get up in the air of either Kevin Pritchard of the Indiana Pacers or with I hate mentioning his name, Paxson and the Chicago Bulls about trying to get one of these guys on your basketball team with at the minimal trading, that number 3 pick for a quality like type player, already all-star caliber type of player.
If it only costs you the 3 pick, if you're Danny Ainge, 3 pick and some players, obviously, to make salaries match, then fine. But if it costs you 3, maybe that Lakers pick, maybe that Brooklyn pick or something of that nature, then I think he might scoff at it. But, as Phil, I said on a little bit earlier, or Pete rather, he said a little bit earlier, like, hey, you have assets. You have roughly 7 draft picks over the next 3 years. They keep forgetting that even it's going to, and then this is another question too. I'm just throw this out here, not a question, but another statement too. They have the Clippers pick, I think, in 2019, I think it is, or something like that. Clippers are in a very precarious situation right now. Blake and Chris Paul leave, so that pick, which seemed to be almost assuredly, late in the draft, might become a lottery pick now if those guys leave that organization. So Boston is definitely armed with picks. And do you want to go after a Paul George rental? Can you afford to do that with some of these draft picks and say, all right, whatever, we'll try to change him and sway him on the culture here? Maybe Jimmy Butler seemed to make a little bit more sense because he's under contract for a longer period. And you don't have the lingering LA thing going on behind him, if you will. But yeah, I think Ainge is going to get into this mix here. He kind of has to, because right now I think the fan base is a little bit skewed and a little bit perplexed as to what he's done here by giving up on what everybody group think here. And I understand that group think isn't always the best think, but when you pass up on talent like Markelle Fultz, you have to think something else is brewing here for Boston.
Well, I think it says a lot too about this particular draft, right, Shaw? Like we talk about how there's so much talent, and this was, this could be very well a very, very deep draft, but it's very guard heavy. I mean, look, man, we've already said the Boston Celtics have way too many guards to count. Okay, so if unless this is a cornerstone changing situation or scenario, I've said it. We had talked about it. You trade down, right? You trade down and you get players that you feel are best equipped for this window of you being able to do more with less. Like the Celtics situation is not the same like as everyone else's that is involved at evaluating and looking at where they're going to be and what's going to be available to them in the draft. So I applaud Danny Ainge for at least putting himself in a position where he's not, trading, just for the namesake of trading. He's actually doing it because there is actually a plan in place here. My question is, though, is that what kind of Danny Ainge are we talking about? Is it Danny Ainge only worrying about the Boston Celtics, or is it Danny Ainge worrying about how he can also mortally wound the teams that could possibly be in his way from elevating himself to a possible NBA Finals bid, right? Like that to me is what stands out. And you've got two teams that respectively play in that same division with marquee players that Danny Ainge can continue to fiddle around. And listen, if nothing else, put the bug in the ear that of all the places that neither one of these players should be going to is the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, I mean, it makes some sense, in terms of what the Celtics are trying to do, trying to become an elite team. They understand that they are not there yet. It is perplexing in a lot of ways where after being cautious and maybe even overvaluing some of their own players from trade overtures that happened in years past, where all of a sudden now you get the number one pick, the best possible pick, the guy that is a consensus pretty much number one, although certain guys may tell you that they're not too sure, but pretty much a consensus number one. And this is the time he makes that move. He just has to be right. And is Paul George the guy that you go out here and bring and try to rent for a year and change him on culture? I don't know. I mean, they're still going to go after Gordon Hayward. They're going to go after Blake Griffin. And then yes, obviously they can put their hat in the ring with Jimmy Butler. But Jimmy Butler has 3 other teams that are trying to make overtures for him. If you count Cleveland, Phoenix, and not even his whole coach in Minnesota, Tom Thibodeau, who is the president of basketball operations and general manager, who can make the decisions for his team and his roster. So Celtics are in a very, very interesting situation. And I just want to say this one last thing. I got to get this out. You all know here, we are quote-unquote Celtics fans here, but we try to keep it 100% unbiased. This is one of those situations right now where I don't know that he did the right thing. And I'm very concerned because Danny Ainge, is not a great drafter. He is a great trader. So if you think, okay, the trade itself is fine in terms of what they've gotten back, but he might have missed a boat on evaluating the talent of a Markelle Fultz. And Ainge has panicked before. Remember that first year the Heat got together. Again, it's not, people won't think about it as a major trade, but trading Kendrick Perkins away for Jeff Green X amount of years ago when the Heat formed their roster was devastating to that team and to that roster at that time. And he panicked. And I don't know what's happened in the situation here in 2017, but I'm not comfortable with it understanding, from what I know of the draft right now. And again, if it works out and he turns this pick into multiple assets and players that are going to be with this franchise and bring the Celtics to a potential NBA Finals, maybe not even win a championship, but at least get them to the NBA Finals, then maybe it's acceptable. But if Fultz turns out to be that dude, not even what Pete said, not just an all-star, but a transcendent all-star and guy who can really lift your roster, you really effed up, Danny Ainge. So good luck to you. I hope it works out, but I'm nervous.
Well, look, I try to talk myself off the ledge numerous times. So anytime I hear the Boston Celtics, like when you sent me the text, oh, look at what the hell Danny Ainge is doing now. I already, in my mind, I'm like, I'm ready to walk the ledge, okay? Here is where I'm ready to not completely walk off the ledge, is because if we're admitting to the fact that Danny Ainge is not a great talent evaluator, it would further put an indictment on why he should have been making moves to facilitate an opportunity to validate where the Celtics might possibly be at this point. I'm not saying that he would have been able to predict that the Boston Celtics were the number one pick. But what I am saying is that he has been fooling around with this roster too long to have not done something to give credence to why he still has these picks and why these picks are highly touted. Guys like Jaylen Brown. There are players on this team now where if they don't do something, again, we're going to go back to what he didn't do. And then because of what might happen if Markelle Fultz goes out there and, he becomes a cornerstone player, we're going to say Danny Ainge had an opportunity to alleviate the pressure of feeling like he had to make that decision by making the roster how it should have been. Not how we thought we ought it be, but how it should have been. We applaud the Celtics for what they've done all the way up until this particular point. Because like I said, they overachieved and they exceeded well beyond what even I was giving them credit to. They were ahead of the curve. But there were players that I think Danny Ainge had an opportunity to move if we're talking about and been talking about the talent level and the play of guys like Markelle Fultz, guys like Josh Jackson, Tatum, even if you want to throw Lonzo Ball into the picture minus his dad, these guys all have opportunities to do more than what they've been already getting from the Celtics roster that they currently have structured. So if you were going to roll the dice, they should have rolled it a whole lot earlier before. And again, if you're going to do something, do it so that there's practicality in how you're trying to build this roster to be competitive. But again, I agree with you, Shaw. Something has to be said about how Danny Ainge, it's kind of like how some people talk themselves into this position, and sometimes Danny Ainge plays himself into this same position.
Yeah, boy, it's precarious, bro. I mean, I don't have much more to say than that. It is a precarious situation right now, and they might be doing the right thing for the future of their team if they feel okay. They're going to buy time. All the things are out there. I'm not going to rehash some of the things that you can all read out there in the different outlets. We understand that trading Fultz means that they're definitely tied and all in on Isaiah Thomas. So IT's happy. He's going to get his $30+ million. No doubt, no matter what's happening now, because they didn't draft anybody who can really replace him. So that's good for him. And maybe for the rest of this roster. But it is a very interesting situation to see what they're going to do with this pick as the draft unfolds. And again, when you have big names out there floating, Jimmy Butler, Paul George, those guys are big name guys that are on teams that you could potentially trade for. Ben Gordon Hayward and Blake Griffin are free agents as well. Hey, you have a chance. You know what I mean? You can make an acceptable move. There's the kind of the dark world, if you will, of Twitter and the internet is talking about, maybe trying to stack up for Anthony Davis and all that. And hey, that would be ideal. I mean, I think I'd give 3 draft picks in a heartbeat against some players if the New Orleans Pelicans would trade me Anthony Davis. But there's no reason for them to do that at this point in time. So we'll have to see what happens with Boston. But it's a very interesting time as the NBA draft approaches, because I didn't expect there to be this much movement and this much chatter at this point.
All right, Shaw. So let's get some final thoughts with regards to Paul George. What does this say about Paul George making this announcement to the Indiana Pacers? Does he take a hit for approaching it in this kind of manner? And if you're the Indiana Pacers, do you kind of breathe a sigh of relief that, here you have a player who actually is willing to give you notice, well in advance? You can't say that he isn't giving you, a warning shot to say, I'm not planning to be a Pacer when after the end of this season. So if you got to do something, go ahead and do it. How does this shape when you look at it from an organization perspective and from a player perspective, like a Paul George, who has been scrutinized this past season for the comments that he's made and, for how he came up short in critical moments in that first round of the series against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Something has to be said about Paul George basically owning this moment, saying, hey, I'm not going to come back and I don't want to be a Pacer any longer.
Right. You give him his credit, give him his props. I mean, just look at the Oklahoma City Thunder. You don't think they would have liked some notice on KD, to see what they could have potentially done. And maybe Durant didn't make his decision really until the summer at some point. But even if he knew he was going to leave, hey, I mean, that's just something that I think any organization would be happy for. Yeah, and there's going to be some fans who are never going to forgive him, like, well, if you get up out of here, you don't want to be here and be all of that. But this is the best case scenario if you know that he's not going to be back, to let them know ahead of time, right, even before the draft, so that moves can potentially be made and they can get the best opportunities and players and assets out there for him. Because this is not a situation, and I know we talked a little earlier about it, where, he's not, Kevin Pritchard is under no obligation. He still has him under contract, but you can't get to that trade deadline, and he's still there on that roster, knowing that he's going to leave in the summer anyway. And then I think his value diminishes some, to some degrees. Like, what can you really get back? Right now, he has the highest value that he's going to have, for any team outside of the Lakers themselves. And I think, Pritchard is doing the right thing and saying, listen, we want to try to get this done expediently. So good for him, Paul George, and letting them know ahead of time, and good on the Pacers for trying to get something done ASAP.
You think he gets traded before or after the draft?
For some reason, I feel like it might happen, on draft night. I think there might be some pieces out there that, maybe Sacramento puts it together and they take a risk and take a swing, saying, hey, it's California. You know what I mean?
Ain't exactly LA, but
but it's Northern California, so bro, what's good? I mean, you never know. I mean, if you would have asked me 3 days ago, would the Celtics trade the number one pick, I would have told you to kick rocks. There's not a chance in the world. At least not for the package that they even got. So, at this point, we can't predict anymore. And I think we maybe need to stop getting off prediction shows, because who the hell knows what's going on? The NBA is obviously on fire right now. So I'd be remiss in saying. I guess I'll ask you, though. I mean, do you think he gets moved by draft night?
I can't see him being moved by draft night, but I do see him being moved before the start of this NBA season. Based on how Pete describes Kevin Pritchard, and based on how Larry Bird is, I want to say that Pritchard has kind of inherited somewhat of a mess by Larry Bird. But at the same time, if there's anyone who's capable of finagling things in a way that puts the Pacers probably in a better situation, and clearly it starts by him figuring out a way to unload Paul George, but not for scraps. So I know that he'll be intently on the horn. I just don't know if whether or not there's anything about this draft that is so increasingly enticing, unless it's putting the Pacers, somewhere in a, in a top 5 situation, which somebody in that realm is really willing to make that risk. And listen, we've already seen the New Orleans Pelicans and the Sacramento Kings, Vlade Divac mess around and play this hey, we're going to roll the dice. And look, it's still not even guaranteed that Cousins is going to remain a Pelican, right? So they might wind up losing both of their marquee players when it's all said and done. So.
And then you wonder at some point, although Pritchard is trying to be very fast and expedient about it and get the most he possibly can, but do teams wait till he becomes desperate and just is willing to try to take a lesser package? You just don't know. You just don't know what's out there. And it is going to be wait and see approach. Before we sign off,
I will say this though, Shaw. Maybe the Pelicans,
they don't have anything. I mean, a stave of DMC, so that you just try to flip DMC for PG and throw in a pick or whatever the case may be. I mean, I who knows? Just who knows? Dell Demps is desperate. They were lucky to flip Healed, and some trash for DMC. But like you just said, we don't know if that's going to work there. So they're not going to trade Davis for Paul George. Like, that's not going to happen. So, and they don't have anything else, on their roster that makes any even remote sense. So I can't see that really being the case right now for Dell Demps and them. But again, there's just so much news and so many things to kind of dive into. And one last thing, we're going to backtrack a little bit here, just real quick, for your standpoint. Looking at the Cleveland Cavaliers, We talked a little bit about this going into the playoffs where the Cavs looking so dominant, kind of reigning over the Eastern Conference. They get waxed in the NBA Finals. Talks about LeBron going to play this last year out. Then he's probably going to leave again, especially since he brought a chip to Cleveland. So he doesn't owe them anything. He could go out west to LA, try to form that super team with his boys and get Chris Paul, Melo, and D Wade all together on some team out of LA or something to that nature. But in the short term, with David Griffin now being unceremoniously, whatever, dismissed or mutually departing, do you feel the Cavs take a step back this upcoming season, which is, to your point earlier, why other teams now need to jump and try to strike while the iron is hot? Do they feel like they can catch the Cavs with some of the shakeup that might potentially be going on?
Well, do I think that the Cavaliers take a step back? I don't know if they necessarily look. I do think that the Cavaliers will possibly take a step back, but I don't think the step backwards is nearly enough that will shake the foundation of the stranglehold that the Cavaliers actually have on the Eastern Conference. Listen, their step back is still 15 steps forward for teams like the Toronto Raptors, Milwaukee Bucks, Boston Celtics, and anyone else that's trying to compete in the Eastern Conference. So unless there is a blockbuster move being had where the narrative is shifting the competitive level, like a team like the Milwaukee Bucks stepping in and rolling the dice and pushing chips in the table to make a play on a marquee player. I think that this basketball team is still going to be a high level basketball team. Whether or not they're going to be a championship caliber basketball team, I think that's going to further expose the, what is completely missing in this team. There's a championship element that is missing in this team, and it's not at the fault of LeBron James. It has to come from guys like Kyrie Irving, and if they stick with Kevin Love, albeit, that I've said it a million times before, I just don't see that trio being an effective trio clearly for the same number of years that we would be talking about the trio of Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant. I make the comparison of these type of trios. That trio between Love, Irving, and James will break up a hell of a lot sooner than me ever worrying about what will happen to those three guys out there in Golden State. And I think that's something that if you're LeBron James, that's what you have to, that's what you're dealing with. That's what you're contending with. Because we wouldn't be having this conversation if LeBron James felt adamant about both of his players that he rolled the dice to come to Cleveland and play with and play around. Have elevated themselves to a point where he doesn't feel like he has to be their Dwayne Wade, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, I don't want to oversell it per se, but I think the Cavs would be a championship team if they just weren't the Golden State Warriors in there. I mean, and that's just what it boils down to. So everyone's chasing GSW because of the way that they've assembled their roster. And regardless, and we've said it 1,000 times over, we'll say it one last time. Kevin Durant, yes, that was the kind of the franchise changing piece in terms to give them dynasty-like potential. But remember, they still drafted Curry. They drafted Klay Thompson, and they drafted Draymond Green, and made some astute moves in getting Andre Iguodala and things of that nature to that. And that's the last thing we need to get to real quick now too. Iguodala, he might be leaving Golden State, right?
It's possible, that rumor came out. But there are reports though that Kevin Durant, he has decided to not take his player option. It does definitely want to re-sign, according to reports, and there is rumors that he says he intends to take less than the max to make room for them to make a play for Andre Iguodala. So this could very well be on Iggy. Maybe Iggy just feels like, I've done my time. I did what I needed to do. I'm a part of something historic, getting 2 championships with Golden State out of 3 years. Maybe this might be, to your point, Shaw, a lot of players think about this. This might be the last big signing and in terms of years and money for me to go elsewhere and just, play out, my time and then just ride off into the sunset. But if you find out that a dude like Kevin Durant is willing to take less money, if you're Andre Iguodala and you're about this special chemistry and how this beautiful this team is, and floating butterflies and flowers all over Granier and everything like that, that's something that you may have to take into consideration, because now you're saying, I'm going to stick with this because I believe I can get another one with this team.
Right, but I think it's hard. He's won a Finals MVP, 2 NBA championships. He's been a 6th man, I believe, of the year as well too. Could quote me if I'm wrong on that. Getting the last side of his career, if he can go out there and get north of 15 million a year, at this stage of his career. I think all the kumbaya and Golden State stuff. It's about self-preservation, right? So I don't know. Like I said, we had this conversation post the finals whether or not who'd be willing to take less money, just trying to keep it all together and things of that nature. I get all that, and things could very well shift back to that. But I think Iggy's agent might have gotten in his ear a little bit. Listen, bro, we can go out here and get one last major payday. You've done everything
you ought to be his agent. I don't know what his agent is trying to tell him, but you ought to be his agent, man.
I mean, that's just reality of the situation, and everybody's built differently. And for the most part, Iguodala seems to be more of a team-oriented guy. Doesn't necessarily to be motivated by the money. But when you're looking at the final days of your career, quote unquote, if you will, and that you can play at a high level, if you can go out there and get $20 million a year when you know that you're only going to be playing maybe 18 to 19 minutes a night, I think you go ahead and do that, and Golden State can't offer him that much.
Well, listen, Shaw, I'm not disagreeing with anything that you're saying, but I will say this. Andre Iguodala is a very intelligent person, okay? I know that we often talk about what Andre Iguodala has done on the basketball court, but off the basketball court, he has cultivated some great relationships. He currently is working with Steph Curry, and they are putting together, what is it called? The Players Technology Summit, which has been right. So let's not act like Andre Iguodala is solely dependent on NBA money. I mean, clearly this is what he does, and this is what he's been doing for so many years now, 10 plus years in the league, right? This is clearly evident. But what I'm saying is he also knows how to get that outside NBA money as well too, and he has cultivated a network with the kind of guys that he knows that he can take those things to the next level. So maybe that might play a small factor in his comfortability level of not worrying too much about getting that money. I think to your point, Shaw, and we'll kind of end it on this note. This may not necessarily be about the money as much as it is about the years, the commitment to playing for that team. Like, why would you want to play 1 year, $20 million and have to come back and deal with the same rigmarole again, especially fear of injury, right? So this could come down to who can give him a 2-year, 3-year deal that he's going to be comfortable with. And maybe he'll take lesser money if it's to play with a team that he wants to play for. So who knows? But I agree with you though, Shaw. If you're going to get something close to 20 mil a year for the kind of play that he's still capable of giving you over the next 2-3 seasons, it would be hard pressed for you not to consider that. But AI, man, this is a more souped up AI. We love our old AI, but this is a much more souped up AI, and he's got 2 rings to prove it.
Yeah, 33 years old. I undersold him a little bit in terms of how many minutes he could play. I mean, he was at 26, for the last couple of seasons there in Golden State. So if he goes somewhere where he's making a little bit, maybe they ask him to stay in that same role. Maybe they bump him back up to maybe 28, 29. Who knows? But either way, what he's going to produce is probably not going to be worth, at least statistically, it's the intangibles that Iguodala has, and he is very valued over across the league. And you've heard the teams that are interested in him: the Chicago's, the Phoenix, Denver. Denver's going to be a major player, I think, in this free agent market as well too, as they try to upgrade their roster. Those are people that are going to be looking at Iguodala. So he's going to have a market, and he's going to have his choice. Golden State probably still the favorite to bring him back, but yeah, he definitely has a market out there, and we'll see where he lands, no matter what the money is.
All right, man. Awesome show. Awesome show. Pete Philo. Really an awesome guy. So glad we had him on board, and so much craziness happening as we're leading right up to the NBA draft, Shaw. It is going to be wild and crazy. And by the way, my man rolling up to New York, rolling up to the Big Apple. So we're going to watch some NBA draft. We're going to be kicking it. I'm actually pretty excited, man. This was well worth the show to have.
Oh, no doubt. I'm super stoked about coming to NYC, see my dude, my partner in crime, see some other family, my nephew, all that, and we're going to be right there live watching the NBA draft. We'll be live tweeting, talking our stuff as brothers do, and, definitely have a little post-game stuff going after that. And we just have so much great content, so many things that are coming up, for our show. We've been very blessed. A lot of people have been reaching out to us and showing us some love, so we appreciate all that. And, like I said, I couldn't do it with anybody else but you, man. I can't wait to see you in a few days, my dude. Few days, and we're going to be right up in this piece.
Yeah, man. So definitely keep us locked, man. We appreciate each and every single one of you guys. For the Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw. Once again, we'd like to thank our special guest, Pete Philo from the TPG Sports Group. Once again, if you are going to Vegas, to check out the NBA Summer League, then definitely go check out the Pro Scout School, July the 10th, July the 11th. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.